Hello, hello, hello. Welcome back to the Conscious Environment Podcast. This week, I got a chance to sit down with Allie Collins, and we got talking about school boards and local elections and how important they really are, and what are your kids actually learning about, and how much influence does a school board or your local whatever have over schooling and your day-to-day life. So that's what we investigated and kind of did a little bit of a deep dive on. I hope you guys enjoy it. Let's jump into it. So I know you, Allie, but some people might not know you who are listening right now. So who are you? What do you do? Where can we find you?
Okay, so my name is Allie Collins. I'm an education and I'm an education advocate. I've been an educator for over 25 years. I've worked as an English teacher, an organizer. Most recently, though, I was on the school board in San Francisco. So if anybody had heard any of that craziness, we've basically been targeted by the right wing, and it sounds crazy, but in the process, I learned a lot about all these anti-CRT and anti-LGBTQ attacks, and have been communicating with educators across the country and trying to raise awareness about the coordinated activity that's been going on to use public education as a way of taking back political control at the local, state, and national level. And the reason I'm on TikTok is because I was targeted so bad on Twitter. I didn't want to keep talking, got on TikTok and learned about all the amazing education that's going on that you do and other folks are doing about racial, just understanding anti-racism and unpacking all that. And I realized there's a lot of young folks here that got a lot of the great education in our schools around Black history, ethnic studies, things like that. And I just really, really appreciate the work that you're doing and wanted to help folks connect the work that you're doing with what's actually happening on a political level, that these two things are intersecting also with public education. So.
Awesome. So, yeah, I think a lot of people, and we'll definitely have to get into the stories of the school board elections and all that in a second, because my local town, actually, I also ran for school board in the district that I'm in as well, and was heavily targeted by a self-proclaimed white supremacist. That isn't me being slanderous or hyperbolic. That's what he called himself, and it's wild, the systems that are in place that even allow someone like that to be able to run successfully, still get a little less than 10% of the vote, which in my opinion is way too much. Way too many people voting for someone who outright said that, they were a white supremacist. And not only just that, so, that kind of glaring obviousness aside, he also ran on a platform of a few things that in a second I'm going to want your opinion on, but he ran, very anti-CRT, which that was a fun thing for me, who was the only candidate of color, the only Black candidate running. So obviously I am a advocate for shoving CRT down the throats of your kids, and I'm gonna do this, that, and the third, teach this upper level graduate college course to your fifth grader. That's my plan, to be honest. He also ran against anti-multiculturalism, anti-LGBTQ, and under the guise of protection.
Right.
And that was his whole platform. I'm going to help save your kids from these people that want to do this thing to you. And this thing is multiculturalism, which is a dog whistle.
Yes.
And, anti-CRT, we're against that. He said flat out, because the school district that I'm in said that they were starting to diversify their DEI, so their
Right.
diversity, equity, and inclusion trainings for their teachers. And he said that he was against diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is a wild
I
sentence
know.
to have come out of your mouth if you're running for an election to help children.
Especially in public schools.
Yeah, especially in public schools. But what I think a lot of people don't understand is just how important the school board is. So, Ellie, what is this? What does someone's local school board
Right.
do?
So from an educational level, like I was an educator, then I had kids. I'm mixed race, black. My dad was the first black professor, one of the first black professors at UCLA. So I'm very focused on access and for first generation students and looking for systems of oppression because Jim Crow finds its way into any system and it recreates itself. So we used to have Jim Crow schools. Now what we have is tracking. We have gifted and talented programs that test out kids. We see that in our large cities. And then we have white flight. All of those systems, people function under this idea like, oh, we're fine now. Brown versus Board of Education happened. It actually happened, but as you know, it had to be, enforced and people find a lot of ways around it. So the really important piece that I realized why I wanted to run was there's only so much you can do at a school level as a parent in advocating for protecting kids when kids are racially bullied, when we want to, talk about who gets hired and fired, and then even bigger systems that are more than just individual, a kid got called the N-word. We're talking about systems that, like in Oakland, I did work with Oakland Unified. Kids would go to a middle school and they would not be offered a class that they needed to take in order to get into college. So kids are getting set up in these tracks and immigrant families, black students, they don't even know they're being tracked out of opportunity, right? And so at a school board level, you have the opportunity to actually put systems in place, take systems out that are discriminatory, and on a really also important level in terms of accountability, hiring and firing. Principals have a huge say in how things get handled when there are racial bullying or LGBTQ bullying. Curriculum, what books are in the classroom, whether there's a focus on having a wide range of books. My kids were bringing me books of talking about how Pocahontas loved being a Catholic and changed her name. That was lies. And so, to say, take those out of this is in San Francisco, take those out of our classrooms, get teachers new materials. All of those big decisions are made by a school board. And additionally, at a state level, in Virginia, where we're seeing a lot of attacks on racial justice education, individual school boards can kind of hold the line. In California, when we were trying to reopen schools, there was a lot of anti-maskers down in Southern California in Orange County. They actually said, we're opening all the schools, no masks, nothing. Individual school districts were allowed to kind of make their own requirements, and they were able to kind of put in masking requirements, even though they weren't required by the larger district. But even more important, what the right knows is that school boards are a pipeline to power. And so they don't care about education. They want to take political control. And so school boards are a stepping stone for higher office. And so that's what's happening in San Francisco and across the country. You have kind of control of what the public knows, in terms of future generations, in terms of what they know about Black history. But on an immediate level, they have control over, they set the tone for the family, the city family, or whatever you call it in your town.
Right.
They become the elected leadership, and those people then are set up for higher office that goes all the way up to state legislature. So they're basically filling the pipeline, is what the right is doing by trying to take over these local offices.
Right. And that, until I ran, that was not something that even crossed my mind.
Because you're not evil and trying to take over the city. You actually cared about kids and education.
Right, exactly. And it's not even so much it's that, but you you think of these things as these kind of organized, left versus right, red, blue
Right.
kind of grudge match sort of things. We oftentimes think of the national level, right?
Right.
Your state congressman, your
Right. Yeah.
that's those are the people that we're thinking of, or the presidential race. Those are the important races or the things that you think about.
Right.
But your local elections are the people that make all the policies around the things that you deal with every single day. Those are the people that you have to worry about. Like, for example, like a small thing that happened in my city, the changing of the budget. So the budget is always a big issue. People's taxes are going up. The budget's always a big issue. People's taxes are going up and stuff like that. So we're always kind of looking at that every single election cycle. It's a huge deal. Everybody likes to scream about it. It's it's the sexy part of yelling about an election. But something I did notice in there was where they were and weren't making up money. So if they project out how much each department or where they are going to get revenue in from different revenue streams, and I noticed that the revenue stream from ostensibly police ticketing, right? So they didn't call it that on the line because that would be way too obvious, but that's what it was the police giving you tickets. And that went up as far as their revenue intake to make up the gap in
Oh, wow.
to balance their budget. That went up almost $150,000. And I was like, wait, how are y'all going to control something like that? It feels like something that you shouldn't be able to control. It would be based off of the populace, right? People
Right.
running a stop sign and then you get pulled over, you get a ticket, or people speeding or whatever, you get a ticket. But if not enough people do crimes that you can ticket, how do you project that you're going to make more money this year from that? That feels suspicious. It feels suspicious. And then the police announced that they've dedicated an officer, hired a new officer and dedicated him just to traffic control. That's all he does all day is pull people over. And it's like, oh, that's how you're going to guarantee that you do that, is you make one guy only do that. That's all he does, is pull people over all day long, and he's got two guys that work underneath him, and that's all they do is pull people over while everybody else runs their beat and does patrols. And that's just a small thing that
Right.
impacts what you do all day long. And the person that made that kind of decision was sitting on the council, and those council members got so much, I guess, brand recognition or name recognition in town from being on the school board for
Yes.
5 years. And then when
Yeah.
election time comes around, now they switch from, hey, I've been taking care of your kids for the last 5 years. I can probably take care of you too. And now
Yeah.
I'm running there. And with these smaller elections that people kind of seemingly don't pay attention to, it's really easy for Republicans to slide these candidates in there and throw money at them.
Yeah.
Like I was forced to run as a Democrat, and they didn't give us any money
No.
at the state level. The state Republicans paid for all of the Republican elections locally.
Wow.
They paid for almost everything. Or they just gave them, an exorbitant amount of money just to hit people enough times so that they knew to vote. And I guess that's my final point on this is voting in these elections are super duper important
Super
at the
important.
local election because at the local level, because that's who affects your day to day. That's who
Yeah.
affects your kids. That's who affects your taxes, your actual taxes that you have to
Yeah.
worry about that will go up and cause a problem. The president can do irritating things that might affect
Yeah.
your taxes at the end of the year, but your property taxes are going up because of the people, those 7 to 15 or 25 people that sit on your council. That's
Yeah.
who raises the municipality that raises your taxes,
Yeah.
or raises your water bill, or raises your
Yeah.
sewer tax, or raises,
Well,
those things that
yeah.
you don't think about.
Well, I want to add too, a lot of people don't understand. I'm in San Francisco, which is a pretty big city, but it's also not as large as New York or LA. the mayor appoints a whole bunch of members as well. So what you're talking about in terms of local politics, you don't understand. People are appointed to the police commission to review the police behavior. There's the municipal transit commissions. All these small task forces are appointed by local offices, and they're the ones who are hiring and firing consultants. They're the ones who are making decisions about where bus lines run, whether kids can get to school or not, all of those things. And the Republicans, they basically lost the presidential election, and they decided, okay, our play is we're going to go for all the small offices. And they're even, they're going for all the little offices. And as you said, they're incredibly well financed. And I was not aware until I was targeted by I ran a campaign in San Francisco, a citywide campaign for $40,000. That is nothing, right? But I was able, as I was a teacher and a mom, right? I did my little campaign and I got the most votes. During the recall, it was insane how much money was spent. I mean, it was $2 million was spent on our election, and outside, billionaires, tech investors, and they invest in a lot of elections. And a lot of them are connected to some of these think tanks. Like, I don't know if people are aware, but we need to all get educated. There's the Manhattan Institute, the Heritage Foundation. Depending on where you are in the country, there are these well-financed parent astroturf groups. They look like they're a real organization, but they're not. And it's basically their job is to really engage a voter base of parents that are, right wing, that will then storm the school board and show up and write op-eds, all of these things. And it's not anything that the Democrats, there's no counter to that in terms of the finance or the communication infrastructure or any of those things to compete. And I don't think most people are aware of how heavily financed and how heavily organized all of this is.
Yeah, a lot of this stuff costs a ton of money, and kind of some of the organizations that we're talking about is like, the Heritage Foundation, those things that you were saying, but like also like Moms for Liberty,
Yes.
which in my opinion is just a rebranding of the Daughters of the Confederacy.
They're a terrorist organization.
Like you have these groups that and actually I just this past episode I just talked about the alt-right pipeline with Sunny Day, and we were talking about kind of this idea of, at face value, if you don't think too hard about it and you just kind of take it for what it is, at the surface level, and this is going to be controversial, it'll blow your minds, everyone. On the surface level, some of the things that they say are supposed to make sense. It's not until you get to the deeper levels where it starts to fall apart and it stops making sense and it starts to get very polarized. But on the outset, from the beginnings of it, you're supposed to be, they're casting the widest net that they can. So if you come to me and you say, oh, well, the Moms of Liberty said that they're just going to go to school boards and they want to have the best candidates on the school board to look out for all of their kids. Isn't that something you want? Yes, that is something that I want. But their idea of the best candidate is not the same thing as the idea of the best candidate that I have. And this is kind of a good segue into some of the things that they're fighting or they're blocking. So the two huge issues that have been populated nationwide have been this push for anti-CRT, and this push for anti-LGBTQ plus, anti-trans, specifically in schools. So what's your experience with that? Because I could go all day on the CRT thing.
Okay, and I think I really appreciate it, and I think what people, I'm in San Francisco, which is very progressive, and we don't have any of the issues that they have in the South. Like, that's what I hear constantly. And yet we were targeted initially, the school board members with me that were targeted for doing things that would be considered critical race theory. They said that we wanted to change names of schools before we wanted to open them. And honestly, we did not author that resolution, although I did support changing the names of schools that were named after enslavers. I'm okay with that. We wanted to remove a mural that had a huge Native American, like they called it the dead Indian. Okay. And kids would say, let's meet under the dead Indian. Totally offensive. Native American and Black students organized. They wrote a resolution. We passed it. This is before I got on the school board. But all of those kinds of issues are national, and they're national talking points. So what I started to notice was we're getting targeted for stuff. It's not being called CRT because that wouldn't fly in San Francisco, but it's the same thing. And what you'll see is there's patterns that are similar. And the other one that's really big is merit-based enrollment, or these selective enrollment high schools. So in our city, it's Lowell High School. In Virginia, it's Thomas Jefferson High School. In New York, it's Stuyvesant, and in Boston, it's Boston Latin. All of these schools have had selective enrollment, which is effectively Jim Crow. And after George Floyd, a lot of school districts started adopting DEI work. They started dismantling a lot of these really discriminatory education practices. And this is a backlash. And they basically use public schools as a way to mobilize conservative voters. But what I really want to encourage folks is to listen to the narratives and start putting them all together, because what you'll be told, and I'm hearing this from Virginia educators who we've become friends. These Northern Virginia educators at Fairfax, Virginia, were experiencing the same targets that we were experiencing. And it was like, I was thinking, that's the South. It's this, and then I realized over the past year, it's the exact same people who are leading these attacks. Christopher Rufo has targeted San Francisco. And if you go on his blog, he says, we're secretly transitioning trans kids. Okay. And they're saying the same thing in Northern, Virginia. And they're calling, parents who are volunteers and trying to diversify their public education system, they're calling them groomers. And we're getting, people in San Francisco are being targeted as groomers for running for office. So it's the same people behind this. And we really need to, I just am so grateful for you to have this conversation, because we need to get educated. And it may look a little different in every town, and every town has its own little history about, people who want to fight for their alma mater that might have the name of a Confederate soldier or something. Right. But all of the talking points are the same. You'll notice there's a lot of people talking about test scores, right? Yep. They're pushing kids can't read, all these progressive policies, nobody can do math nowadays. We have to go back. And it's this, we want to go back to these old ways. And it's also a way of disparaging public education. The ultimate goal is to dismantle it so that they can have vouchers and charters. And we can actually go back to the 1800s when nobody had free education. You had to pay for it. That is the ultimate. I used to think, it's Jim Crow they want. Now I'm like, no, they want to go before Jim Crow, where there was just no public education. Everybody had to pay for it. And, that's kind of, anytime you hear people trashing public education and creating fear, the ultimate goal is to hurt the brand. And that's exactly what Christopher Rufo has said on Twitter, and his tweets are still there. He said, we've hurt the brand. It's all a marketing strategy. And the work that you are doing is so important because you're helping people to see those narratives. And that's the work that we have to do. Right.
So I guess some tips for people kind of moving forward to make some of this stuff actionable. Right. And this is essentially what we're trying to do here, is inoculate you to these things. Yeah. So this will be us giving you the talking points that you're going to start hearing. Start to notice in your town or nearby, because I always say that Florida and Texas are testing grounds for the conservative nationwide movements. We're seeing especially with women's rights things. We're seeing Lindsey Graham. I can't talk about the thing here live, but that thing, Lindsey Graham asking for a national ban on that. I knew within the year we would see that national ban, because as soon as the Texas GOP released their plan of action for the next 4 years or whatever it is, that was in there, that they were going to call for a national ban. So it was a matter of time before they start calling for a national ban. But so as far as the schooling goes, start to notice the language changes, right? So it's not critical race theory. That critical race theory, also to folks who don't know, critical race theory has been around for over 40 years. Critical race theory is a typically a law examination of how our systemic issues actually are affected by race. That was what it was initially done as, and what is happening to me? Initially done as and brought up
Can I speak to that?
by the Harvard Law School. That was their initial idea, was that we're not talking about this from a racial lens, and these things are disproportionately impacting people of color. We should talk about it like that. That's how critical race theory was born. That's usually what it's about. What they're extrapolating, and what I've been saying for a little while, is they don't want to ban on critical race theory. They want to ban on comprehensive American history. They want to ban your
and
AP
talking about
history
race.
class.
Period.
That's the thing that they don't want, is because that's actually their issue. So we're seeing in Texas them making small changes, like they can't say slave anymore. They say worker, or they're changing their textbooks.
Involuntary immigrant. That was the
Yes,
big one I heard.
yes. Involuntary immigration. All of those things, so all of those things are done by a board that's made up of school boards across the state, members from each one, and then they have like a statewide, they have a statewide textbook group that picks the textbooks.
Right.
And that's who makes that decision. And all of those people are supposed to be teachers or parents or concerned citizen, insert whatever. And that's who's making that big of a decision statewide. Texas is one of the last states that does it like that. A lot of times the adoption is by kind of like the greater regional area. And this is something you can look up in your area. Does your school in particular pick the textbook? Or is it like 5 districts get together and all decide who's going to adopt the textbook in your area? That will be something to look into if this kind of thing bothers you. A great book to read is Lies My Teacher Told Me. It's an awesome explanation and analysis of history, U.S. history books, U.S. history textbooks over the last, I think he goes back about 20 years into the 90s, and it came about from a professor whose students were like, "This isn't right. The textbook is incorrect as to history. Why did they write it like that?" So they started writing to McGraw. They started writing to these textbook companies, which there's only a handful of textbook companies that write all of the textbooks. And another fun, dirty secret is all the names you see on the textbooks, most of those people didn't write that textbook at all. Most of those people don't even see the textbook until it's out, if they ever see it. It's just for name recognition, not even for the parents. It's for the districts to be like, oh, this professor, this doctor, this person had input on this. And it is not true. It is just a flat out lie. So that's another rabbit hole that you can get into. But bouncing back to what you were saying before about charter schools and vouchers, this flips over to Florida, where I can't remember exactly if it's gone through or if it was just rumored. Not rumored, it was something the governor said, but what they were going to do was allow for a parent to be able to sue the school district and remove their child from the school district if they didn't like what they were teaching in the school. And then what they could do after they did that was the school, because of state laws, was required to provide education at another facility if it was available. So what they're doing is they're setting up these charter schools or these private institutions that need a tuition.
Right.
They're taking the funding from your public school because these parents are able to sue and say, I want my kid to go to this other school, so you guys got to give us the money or pay for the voucher in order for my kid to go to this private school. And because it's a private school, they can't say that they're not going to allow black kids, or they're not going to allow trans kids, or not going to allow LGBTQ kids. Actually, probably trans and LGBTQ, they could make a stronger argument as that's against
Their religion.
a religion. You could say there's a ton of different reasons that they could say that they are not going to offer spaces to those kids, or they don't even have to say that they're not going to offer spaces to those kids. They just don't. And it's a hidden, it's a known secret that these are basically going to be segregated schools. So what they're trying to do is dismantle the public school system in a way by saying your kid is going to be indoctrinated with all this evil stuff at this school. We're going to set up, as the government, we're going to set up a way so that you can get your kid out of that school and go to another school where those kids, those people won't be there. You could just put them in their own school and just keep them separate.
Yeah.
One of the leaders of Moms for Liberty actually said that. We should just have a school that's just for, minority and LGBTQ kids. They should still get an education, but they should have their own school if they want to do that. And then we have our own school for the kids that aren't minority or LGBTQ. We're not going to say only white kids.
We just want segregation academies. That's what we want.
No, not segregation. We just want separate schools.
Right. Yeah.
And that is something to be on the lookout for. If an educator, an administrator starts using words like CRT, get nervous about what is about to come out of their mouth next, because any educator worth their salt knows that CRT is not taught K through 12.
Well, I want to push back on that, because I've been going to the CRT summer school with Kimberly Crenshaw, and she's one of the architects of CRT, and she's been targeted, right, by them, and they've been doing research, and what they've realized is when we say we're not teaching CRT, because we're not teaching, as you said, this this really high level legal analysis of laws, but most people don't know what it is. So what happens is this Christopher Rufo and all these folks are saying CRT is like child abuse, basically is what they're saying. They're saying we're indoctrinating kids to hate themselves and we're making them trans. It's like child abuse, right? And so we need to tell them what we are doing. And she says CRT is a prism and a practice. So she says we should say, yes, we believe in teaching true history. We believe in having diverse books, right? But when we say that it's not happening, in some ways, it was happening in San Francisco, because I was saying, I want kids to go to a school that affirms their identity, and they get curriculum. They can learn about themselves, their culture, and other cultures of other kids. That's a kind of a CRT lens, which is saying like, the impact of education should make kids feel visible and valued in their school, right? And that's what we were targeted on. So I do think it's important for us to shift how we message and say, instead of it's not happening, this is what Kimberly Crenshaw is saying. Let's not say that it's not happening. Let's tell them what is happening and explain what people will lose, because most people want kids to learn true history. Most people want empathy and like cooperation. They want schools to be safe for LGBTQ students. Like, they've polled people, but there's this really small group. They've basically dominated the airwaves because they have the money and this right-wing kind of social media infrastructure and, the megaphone of, Fox News. And they're telling people what CRT is. So that's why, like I said, I really appreciate you and other creators that are on here that are really explaining this is what it means to think critically about race. And even Kimberly Crenshaw says, if we make talking about racism unspeakable, we make racial equality unachievable. And that's basically what they want to do. They want us to stop talking about race so they can just keep inequality and oppression in place.
See, right. So Kimberly Crenshaw is one of those initial law students that I was talking about when I was saying like this was the brainchild of them. So she's been at the forefront of this idea since its inception. She took
Yeah.
took the reins kind of and ran with it. And so let me correct and restate. Having a critical race, that's why I say that what we do on here is teaching critical race theory, because
Yes.
we're thinking about race through a critical lens, which is a discipline of, it's a school of thoughts, how you understand a topic. When I say that children aren't learning it, they aren't learning that part of it.
Yes.
They're learning through the educators. So
Right.
educators having, so where the attack comes when they're saying, oh, they're teaching your kids CRT, what they mean is they have educators and teachers that are using a critical eye to view race and be considerate while building their curriculums.
Yes.
That's exactly what they're saying.
And that's what we
So-
want. I want
so,
my kids to
Allie,
get that.
you're right. Instead of getting mired in the buzzword Olympics and in getting caught up with, well, CRT is technically this, so it's not being taught there. That
Right.
blah blah. Instead of getting into that argument, it's no, this is what we are teaching. We're teaching comprehensive American history. You want your kids to learn about American history. And this is part of the inoculation to this thing. So somebody, let's say somebody who isn't in the same sphere as us, we're trying to reach out of echo chambers. So don't just talk to your friends that that agree with you. You have to reach out to people that are like, no, wait, I don't agree with CRT, and
Right.
ask them, what is it that they don't like? What don't you like about it, or what do you think it is? Don't even I get necessarily even asking them what do they think it is. It's like, oh well, what's it going to do to your kids? Like, what is it? I want to know. Like, what's
Yeah.
so bad? And let them explain. And it's normally going to be something along the lines of indoctrination. That's another buzzword. Abuse, grooming. That's a new buzzword that they've been using a lot lately. Grooming, and it's going to be something probably along those lines, because those are the talking points around critical race theory. And then you say, well, from my understanding, it's just like AP US history. You were in AP US history. It's just understanding the history of the country better. I mean, that's all it was. Like there were slaves. What do you mean? We know that part. That's what it's about. It's like, oh, well, it's supposed to make kids feel bad. And something that I always push back on is, well, when they teach anything about history, they always teach both sides, right? There was abolitionists and there was enslavers. Like, why doesn't a kid just teach them that they would have been one of the abolitionists? Because if they feel bad, or they feel, they don't like what it is, do they feel bad about themselves, or do they not like what they're hearing? Because they shouldn't like what they're hearing. That should make them upset, because it's an upsetting thing. But why wouldn't they just identify with the abolitionists? They were also upset. They were also mad. They also didn't like what was going on, but they opted to change it. And then, in this, as you get more educated with the history, with the framing of this stuff, the way that CRT actually works, it's easier for you to talk to somebody who wants to continuously push back on it, or doesn't like it, doesn't agree. My favorite thing to tell people is that 1619 was when the first Africans landed in what would be Virginia, the colony of Virginia, and they were about 20 odd. Some more were sold, and at the same time, actually a few years before that and after that, we had Quakers in what would become Philadelphia, but Georgetown at the time. They had written a petition saying that they did not want to trade in the forced labor of men's bodies.
Oh, wow.
That was a petition that German Quakers were pushing forth in what would be the state of Pennsylvania, the colony at the time, That's what they were pushing for. We don't want the forced labor of men's bodies. And they were even talking about indentured servitude and full stop chattel slavery at the time. They thought that this was kind of ridiculous. In their minds, they had escaped Europe from that kind of thing. So why would
Right.
we start that here in the same way? Because they were at the time still enslaving Native Americans, First Nations people. They were enslaving and enslaving Africans that were being migrated through, and they knew about this throughout the colonies. So Pennsylvania at the time was like, no, we don't want any part of that. So how far back in American history do we need to go before
Right.
you can start agreeing with someone? We don't have to always say it was always like that and
Right.
everybody would have been a slave owner, because the entire time that we've had enslavers, we've had abolitionists. So kids learning about history, do you want your kid to side with the enslaver, or do you want your kid to side with the abolitionist? And
Right.
that's what you need to teach your children. That's what you need to push back on these educators and these administrators that are saying, no, we need full stop to get rid of this teaching in this area.
Yeah. Well, I also think too, as an educator, right? You were talking about AP. AP is about thinking critically and being able to analyze things. And as an English
Right.
teacher, being able to read a book like To Kill a Mockingbird, which is from one, white man's perspective, it's arguably a great piece of literature, but then also to read The Hate You Give. There are educators that have this called, what they call it, disrupt texts, that I follow. This idea of pairing two pieces of literature with two different perspectives on the same theme, and then engaging with students about, like, how does the story change, or how does the way that this author approaches this story change based on their lived experience, right? That's thinking critically, right? That's deeper
Right.
thinking. So if you really care, forget about racism, talk about academic achievement and the ability to think critically and analyze points of view, and present a coherent argument. That's only possible when you have multiple perspectives, right? And so what they're doing is they're dumbing down the curriculum, by saying we're going to get back to the basics. It's going to be really basic because we're just going to
Right.
have just, I see Sam, and it's just, that's it. And in some ways, maybe that's their goal as well, is to keep people from thinking critically and really analyzing, and that's really important, I think, even for an electorate. Forget about, whether kids go to college or not. They want to make sure that voters are miseducated and are just, have the blinders on and don't think critically, don't know how to analyze narratives, the stuff that you're doing on a daily basis, right? Just analyzing, hey, this movie came out. What is it really saying, right? We should be able to do that to be fully functioning, citizens in America, and they don't want us to do that.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And I think it's something else. I just want to stop and point out, because I'm reading a few things that are kind of flying by very quickly in the comment section. But I do want to address this. There is a reason why we are polarizing and making this a political thing. And Allie can go into a little bit more detail, because she was targeted way more than I was. And it's because I almost really, really dislike this narrative of the two wings of the same bird. There's a great book that I read called "It's Even Worse Than You Think," and it's about this idea. Yeah, I know, what an awesome title for a
I don't
book.
know if I want to hear this.
Yeah, it's called "It's Even Worse Than You Think," but the idea is that it is part of the conservative, alt-right, far-right's game plan is to convince you that they're both the same. Because once you start doing that, once you start saying this narrative that they're both the same, you legitimize the far-right's points. Because what
interesting.
is the left and the right arguing about? What are leftists really looking for? And what is the far right actually looking for. Because if the comparison is that it is an equal argument with equal merit to say that children that are LGBTQ or minorities should not feel as though they're out of place and hated within school, and yes, they should, are both equal arguments,
They're
we have a
just two
problem.
different opinions. Yeah, that's just
Yeah, I
not
mean
okay.
they're both the two wings of the same bird, because
Right.
those are the things that we're talking about when we talk
Right.
about fighting for comprehensive American history. That's to add a place for marginalized people to feel comfortable in their learning of education. That's to decentralize whiteness and white supremacy as the gold standard, the normalized version of what American history should be. That's what critical race theory does, is it combats that. That's what comprehensive
Yeah.
American history does, is it combats that and says, no, white supremacy is bad. It's been there the whole time because
Right.
it's a bad thing, but people have been also fighting it the whole time, and we should continue to fight it this
Yeah.
entire time. So I have to push back on the comment section saying that, oh, they're both the same. They're not. Because what I would encourage you to do
Yeah.
is to pull out your journal that I hope use, and I want you to do what we did in class. Make a little T-bar, make a left and make a right,
Right.
and write down opposite ideas. Write down leftist ideas, and then write down what the counter argument is, and then tell me if they're the same thing. Tell
Yeah.
me if those are both equal weighted arguments in your heart. If they are, I don't know, man. Like, just the destruction of peoples because of their manufactured race doesn't feel like it's an argument that I should give weight to.
No.
The life that me and Ellie share, like who we are as people, what makes us up, that can't go away. Our humanity shouldn't be
Right.
up for debate. And there's one side that's saying it isn't up for debate, and there's the other side that says we probably shouldn't even be people.
Right.
So if you're going to tell me that those two things are the same, I don't know. We're going to have a huge, gigantic argument.
And I think that's the point, right? Is like to confuse people so that they disengage, and at the same time they're ginning up the base by using a lot of what I realized too. I'm not religious. I wasn't brought up in the church. They use a lot of religious language, right? And it's that tapping that energy from a Christian white nationalist base to kind of take over political control. And so we have to be there. I know it's upsetting sometimes for people, to see all this crazy stuff happening, and you just want to
Right.
shut down. But you need to show up. And I'm going to tell you, for me as an educator, there's librarians that are being forced out of their jobs because they refuse to take LGBTQ affirming books off of their shelves. They are not being paid enough anyway, and they are still fighting to make sure that their, LGBTQ students feel seen on the bookshelf. And so everybody, even if you don't have kids, please vote for your school board, do the research, as Ryan is saying, and show up at school board meetings when some of these kind of issues around book bans or murals or school names or whatever stuff they're talking about, curriculum. We need sane, rational, thoughtful, caring, empathetic people to show up and back up the educators and organizers who are trying to protect progress in this environment, because I just can't tell you how many educators I'm hearing about that are being targeted nationally at the school board level, but all the way down to the classroom level. And in a small town, you, as one person or 5 people to show up at a school board meeting, you can make a huge difference for the people who are trying to stand up for the rights of all kids.
Right. And to really hit it home, and impress upon it, that 5 people, we know it, we're saying it to honestly to energize you, to get you interested, and you can make that difference at that level, because who already knows that they can make that difference is the other side. They
Right.
already know that they can be those five people in that room. I mean, think of just this past summer, all the viral videos from school board meetings and things
Right.
like that. They're not huge meetings, they're not huge
Mm-mm.
things. A lot of times it's just the school board, and then there's like maybe five or six people, but it's one guy, and he stands up and he's passionate and he spits out a ton of alt-right talking points, which one I'll touch on right now. A one of the far alt right talking points is a rejection of time and space, and I know that sounds really out there, but it's a rejection of time the way that it is. So it's always a claim and a clawing to something that was before. The way that time is moving to where we are now is negative. Progression is negative. So we need to regress back to when we were in a perfect state, when time was better for everybody. We need to get back. There's got to be a way to say this, Allie. We have to, if we could just make
It's true, though. It's this imagined reality
America
that doesn't exist, though.
good one more time. Is that it? We should make America.
I think there's
It's
an
on the tip of
acronym
my
that
tongue. I can't
maybe
think of it.
somebody
Somebody will
came
come
up
up
with.
with it.
Yeah. We could make
And
hats.
I actually saw earlier today on CNN a oh boy, I think it was Rachel Maddow, and I don't want to quote her, but it was a quote by she was giving a talk and she was saying that one of the best ways to inoculate people to to these things is when they show up at these meetings. The far right wants to show up at these meetings and they want to be loud and say we should make America great again and go back to the 50s and go back to this time
Right.
before all this woke stuff. We need to get back to a better time and a better place and all those things. Make America Great Again was a slogan used by the KKK back in the 60s. None of this is new. This is
Right.
all old news. So
That's why they don't want to teach history. Sorry, I had to say that.
exactly. And instead of going and not saying that you shouldn't confront them, but instead of giving them the airtime in the space that they want, inoculate your community and energize your
Yes.
community
That is
and
great.
tell them, hey, these guys are saying these points, but none of this is new. None of this
Yeah.
is a new idea. It's not new information. It's this clinging onto a past that never actually existed. And the only things that they can think about is that all of these new progressive things didn't actually exist then, and this change is going to be bad for their social standing, for
Right.
their position of power where they can achieve. This American dream will never be achievable for them if white men aren't allowed to always be on top. If we have to share that space, then what are white men supposed to do with the American dream? That's why you hear a lot of, when talking about this time before, you hear a lot of, oh, there was no LGBTQ back when I was young, or there was no this when I was
Right.
young. When I was a kid, we didn't have any of these problems. We didn't have any
Yeah.
of these things. And it's like, no, you did. They just got beat up a lot or killed, and people were
Right.
quiet about it. Like, what are you talking about? We've all, everybody, we've always been here. We've always
Yeah.
existed. Black people have always existed. Queer people have always existed. We've
Yeah.
always been here. I'm sorry. Your kids were always going to run into them. You were always going to experience
Yeah.
them. But the obsession with, yes, a past that never existed to achieve a future that is unattainable is the obsession of the alt-right. And that's why the destruction of public schools, segregation, like we keep saying it like segregation isn't on the table, but we said that about Roe v. Wade. So y'all gotta
Well,
buckle
so
up.
I want to say something on that. Affirmative action is going in front of SCOTUS on the 31st, Halloween. It is scary, okay? And if you follow anyone, you should be following, her name is Dr. Oyan Poon. I'll post on my page so that people can see her on Twitter. She's an educator, Asian American educator. They're using conservative right-wing Asian Americans to push this case. And they're saying that affirmative action is anti-Asian. And she's an educator who's actually been pushing Asian American studies, and she's put a whole syllabus together. But that's another one. They're going to pull away any race conscious education policies, and they'll basically make it illegal to have Black student unions, to celebrate Black history. Like, that's
Right.
what they're going to be going after next. And so people should be aware and paying attention to this SCOTUS, decision on affirmative action, which is, it's going to have big impacts, not just for college admissions, but in all, education. And I'm assuming it would also relate to work settings as well, where they're trying to
Right.
implement more, inclusive hiring practices. So,
Right. And the thing is, affirmative action has never really worked the way that people think it works. There's never been race quotas or things like that. That's always been illegal in any sort of policy or law surrounding affirmative action or things like that. And affirmative action, as quiet as it's kept, has benefited white women the most out of any group at all in history
right.
ever. So you can see who's pushing these things, and yeah, they're going to prop up Asian Americans to push forward this narrative that, yeah, see, actually it's bad for Asian Americans. But if they win this case, it's still bad for Asian Americans.
It's going to hurt them. Yes.
It's worse for Asian Americans. It's
Right.
worse for other minorities. And white ladies, you're going to have it worse too, because they're trying to strip away
right.
they're trying to strip away women's rights as well. So this checks off a bunch of. They're playing checkers. I mean, they're playing chess.
It's a bingo card. Maybe,
It's
right?
checking off a bunch of different things for them. They get to severely cut down on what a company or a municipality can do for minority groups or marginalized groups at all wholesale, and they get to hurt women across the board.
Yeah.
That's
and make it illegal to even look at race. Just to even,
Right.
I mean, I think that's the thing, right? Is if we can't collect data, we can't examine the impact of decisions with a racial lens, then it's like, no problem. We just made it go away by not looking at it. That's basically the plan. So,
Right, exactly. It's the previous president's plan about COVID. We just won't
Yes.
test, and then we won't, and then the numbers will go down because there'll be no positive tests if we
Exactly.
don't look into it. So those are a few things as far as I guess like kind of buzzwords and things to look for. Especially the I know we focused a lot on history, but that's where it's manifesting a lot, especially when they're talking about CRT. They're almost certainly talking about history.
And book bans. That's the other one.
Yeah. Book bans and things like that. And just notice, and this is what I would encourage everybody who's listening, watching, notice when you have administrators or officials or anybody, running for these positions, etc., that start talking about a past to go back to. We need to go back. We need
important.
to get
Yes.
back to when schools
very
were
true.
schools and teachers were teachers. Once you start hearing rhetoric and things like that, you need to start asking a lot more questions.
They're
Like,
doing that in San Francisco.
What year?
You're
Of course
They're
they
doing
are.
it in San Francisco, right? So it's true. These are the common themes. And when you can learn to see the common themes, then you can say, okay, that's what's going on. You hit it right on the nose.
Right. So that would be my biggest advice to you, as far as like one that's super large. It's a really big talking point that you can hear right now. They've been doing it for years, and you can tell it didn't even just start with the previous president and Make America Great
Right.
Again. It started, like I said, in the 60s, they were talking about this. In the 20s, they were talking about this.
Wow.
In the 1800s, they've been talking about this. Like, Texas is putting forth things saying, like, they want to get rid of the Civil Rights Act. We need to pay attention to when they say things, and then they hide it underneath
Yeah.
it's for the kids. It's to protect
Yeah.
kids. Groomer, watch words like that.
Yeah.
To
Yes.
elicit this sort of devious sexual nature behavior, things
Right.
like that. Don't try to hit them with stats because they don't care about that. You
No.
could say LGBTQ are more likely to be preyed upon than be the offenders in any SA sort of
Right.
situation. It doesn't matter. They
No.
don't care about those kinds of facts. They care that they feel like something's being taken away from them. And if you
Right.
can connect with them on that level and say this thing isn't being taken away from you, it's being built upon to make this place better than it was
Hmm.
before. That's what progression is.
Yeah.
It's not a zero sum game where progression means that we take away from you to create where we are. It's building on.
Right.
And I know every leftist in the comments is like, exactly. We're just
Right.
moving forward. We're not
Right.
removing anything.
Yeah.
It's not to take away from someone's place. It's to add on to make things better where we're
Yeah.
going in the future.
Yeah, so it's interesting too. I want to add that the African American Policy Forum is a group that people should follow. They just did a Books Unbanned tour. They're doing a lot of education,
Nice.
especially in the states that are most targeted. There's a lot of information about the local laws, so people can go online and they can even see like individual states can you can find out what are the laws in every state that you want to be advocating with. But they're also saying that just it what were you just saying? There was a point. I lost my train of thought. But it is a good resource, definitely, and I encourage folks to get online and check it out. Those individual resources on those laws.
Yes. So I would look into actionable item that I'll give, and then Allie, if you have anything
Yeah.
to add before we take off, repeat that resource one more time. But one actionable item
Mm-hmm.
that I want to give to people is first thing you should do: find out when your school board election is. School
Yes.
board elections are usually super, super weird. They're outside of normal election cycles and they're a much shorter cycle. You normally end up voting for your school board at the end of the school year,
Really?
not in
Okay.
November. You normally it's like May or something like that. I
Ours
know
is
in New York.
happening on election day, but I don't know how it is in other places, and that's something I didn't know. So you're
Yeah,
educating me.
so in New York, it happens at the end of the school year, not on election day.
Oh
Some
wow.
places, thank you for that. Yeah, some places it might be on election day.
Yeah.
Other places like New York, it happens in May, so that they can reconvene
Hmm.
in June with the
Okay.
new because they start working over the summer, so they reconvene in June with the new board.
Hmm.
And yeah, so your new board happens then. So you may be like, oh, we gotta check this out for November. We have until November to worry about this. But no, you have until May, or you have until June, or you have until August, or it might be right before the beginning of the school year, so that they start at the beginning of the school year. Something like that. Or yeah, it might be in November and then they have like a
Hmm.
lame duck season and it ends and they begin back up in the beginning of the year,
Right.
January 1st or something like that. So my homework to you would be find out when that election is and when the next one is, and then
Right.
find out all the names of your locals, even if you don't have kids. This is
Yes.
everything that we're saying, because you need to know their names from when they run for mayor,
Hmm.
because that's the next thing. They're going to be
Yeah.
school board president for 3 years and then they're going to run for mayor. So know who these people are right now. So that's my
Yeah.
homework for you. Find out the names of the school board members in the district you live in and find out when that election is. And Allie, I'll leave it to
Okay.
you.
Okay.
Give us
So I
go
want to
on.
add on to that and say there's state and local, which you mentioned. So the state, there's a lot of activity happening around legislation, whether they say, like in Illinois, positively, they said every child should know Asian American history. They want it infused throughout the state in the curriculum for history. So state legislatures can decide on things like that. You need to know if they're doing good work or if they're doing bad things, like banning certain teaching in schools. And that's on the African American Policy Forum website. And they have Teach Truth as their hashtag. You can go online, and I'll share some information about how you can access some of those resources. And there's even workshops where you can learn about, you can meet folks and learn about what people are doing to push back. Additionally, I also wanted to add, I remembered, the African American Policy Forum commissioned some polling. They actually talked to voters, and what they learned was that there's a large number of people who don't know what CRT is at all. They don't oppose it, they don't support it, they're just confused. So, and when you tell them what it is, and you say what you said, Ryan, it's teaching a comprehensive history, it's reading books from a variety of different perspectives, it's, most people support that. And so it's not so much convincing people that are, diehard, right wingers, but just the general population supports a lot of the efforts that people have been doing to make schools more inclusive and more safe for all kids, right? So talk to folks that are maybe not interested in voting because they think, oh, it's no big deal, or they're just, uneducated. That is really important. And finally, I also want to say parents can get educated and can push back locally. Start a Black affinity group at your school, like a Black student union, a Black parents group. Having collective power, or LGBTQ. In San Francisco, we have something called Q groups. They're groups of kids, queer, trans kids. We need to find ways to support one another as we push back against these policies. On my website, and I have in my link tree, or, I have lists of stuff, but how to start a Black parent group, how to ask questions at your school, like, is this school Black family friendly? Is this friendly for LGBTQ students? Like, I'm not trans, but I have friends who are, and now I know I should look and see, is there signage for unisex bathrooms? Like, those are the kinds of things that you can become aware of, and then you can become an advocate for other communities, right? So those are two really big things you can do on a very personal level, and build networks of community like what you're doing online, Ryan, but in your actual physical neighborhood, get to know other families and get to know other neighbors that value these ideas and share resources and support one another in educating your community and getting out to vote.
Perfect. So one last thing before we take off, just what was that, your website? How can people get in contact with you? You dropped a lot of resources. I know people will go back and try to catch them again, but you said that you have a bunch on your website.
Yeah, so I have at allymcollins.com. I have basically, it's like a link tree. I have links to my podcast. I've interviewed researchers who've been researching these dark money attacks. If you're interested in that kind of high level political analysis, I have 2 podcast episodes talking about that. Another one would, and then I have also links to articles and resources on my blog. I have a questionnaire for Black parents they could bring into a PTA meeting saying, is our school Black family friendly? So there's a lot of resources that are just kind of hands-on like that. And I'll also be posting on my feed some of those resources, but people can feel free to DM me if we're mutuals, or they can, comment on some of my, if you're on TikTok, obviously they can comment and ask for some of the resources that I've mentioned, and then I'm happy to share that information as well. My contact information is also located at the Allie M. Collins website. And you can also find my podcast on YouTube through that link.
Cool. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Allie. If you're listening on Spotify or you're listening on the podcast somewhere, check the show notes and you'll see all of Allie's contact info, her website, and all that stuff. If you're in the live right now with us, click through, go follow her. please go check out all the resources. She's laid out a bunch of stuff in her link tree that's super duper duper helpful, and on her website that's helpful. And podcast important podcast. Go listen to her podcast. But thank you so much, Allie. I love you. I appreciate you. Thank you for being
Ryan.
here.
I just want to tell you, I'm grateful to the education you do, and you brighten my day. Normally, I get bummed out, like knowing all this stuff, and you make it at least fun at times. And I just really, really appreciate you. And now that I know that you were running for office, just willing to do service, I'm really grateful for what you're doing, and just a big, big supporter. So just thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you, everybody, for hanging out. We love you all. We'll see you later.
Bye.
Bye. Well, thank you guys so much for listening, and I hope you enjoyed that as much as I enjoyed recording it for you. And please do remember that we do this live every single week on TikTok at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Thursday nights. And that's over at my page at iDefOverthink, IDEFF Overthink. And thank you again to Allie for coming on the show. It was a pleasure speaking with you. And if you want to support the show, you absolutely can. We have links so that down below that you would be able to support us monetarily with Venmo or Cashapp. Or if you can't monetarily support us, just rate and review the show. It absolutely helps so much. By the time you hear this, hopefully we're on Apple Podcasts by then. It's been a little bit of a holdup, but please do me one last thing. Go drink water right now. Please stay hydrated. I love you. See you next week.